if we've learned anything, it is don't trust the data center operators. They're the most predatory, corporate, greedy operators I've ever seen in my experience. The county's now spent nearly $2 million on covering up a mistake.
So there's been a lot of conversation around the digital gateway, but not a lot of clarity as to how some of this stuff unfolds. I'm Lesley Salman, and we are going to sit down and discuss the process kind of behind the scenes here with Mac Haddow, who led the challenge and is also president of Oak Valley HOA. So how are you feeling at this point in the journey?
We're doing well with a circuit court decision that thankfully we drew a judge who was interested in actually seeing the evidence as opposed to the lawsuit that was dismissed. They unfortunately got a judge that accepted the county's argument that even if there was a defect in the advertising, they were protected under the safe harbor clause in the state statute, which essentially says if it wasn't the county's fault, then it's no problem. They can be protected. The problem with that decision was it wasn't evidence-based. But Judge Irving, who got our case, really wanted to see the evidence, and so she allowed for us to make a presentation on the evidence and data that we had. We're sitting at the appeals court and a unanimous decision. The county's now spent nearly $2 million on covering up a mistake. When the mistake was discovered by one of the attorneys that works for the data center operators, they called the county and said, hey, there's a problem. That advertisement did not get published in the Post, so it's not timely. Instead of then saying, okay, we're going to investigate to see whether it's true or not, whether whose fault was it? They determined that a strategy that said, we're going to blame the Washington Post.
Right.
And the Washington Post quickly said, no, we didn't make a mistake. We gave multiple requests to the county clerk telling her that you have to get this into us and approve it. And the county clerk didn't. And when that discovery was made, we shouldn't have spent $2 million to do that. The judge found it out immediately, and the county attorney, Michelle Roble, told the Board of County Supervisors that there was a risk, and that generally speaking, the courts don't favor local governments when it impedes the rights of citizens. She warned them. But then she said, but the data center operators have assured me that they will accept all of the legal risks that are associated with proceeding with the rezoning hearing. And it was the courage of Bob Weir, who walked out of closed session, former supervisor, who's now passed away. He walked out of closed sessions and he immediately confronted the board and said, we didn't advertise this properly. I move we postponed. And the board voted, majority vote, no. Ann Wheeler, however you describe her role in all of this, she was the chief cheerleader for the data center industry. This was her pet project. She was elected to protect us against any developer. She's supposed to be the defender of the citizens. Instead, she became the defender of the applicant. She thinks that it's the gold mine, the payday for taxpayers in the county. I live here in Gainesville District. My taxes have gone up every year. I've not seen any tax relief from all of these data centers. They're all over the place. So that's a flat out lie. It's a fraud on the taxpayers. You get pollution in the air because each one of these 37 data centers has to have backup generators. And they are cargo truck sized generators. The acceptance in the community of data centers has gone down from the mid 60s to the mid 30s in just the last year. That was published in the Washington Post here just a couple of days ago. But you have people like Supervisor Angry, who accepted a payment by the data center operators to fund a community event and pay for fireworks. They have found a willing government body they don't care about the communities. They don't care about the citizens that live in them. They're just going to do whatever brings in more money from the data center industry to have what will be an industrial zone in Prince William County, not a residential area.
Well, and that's something too that I was interested in and or I've noticed, and I don't know how you feel about this or your opinion, but now they're going in and eating up all this industrial zoning, and people that actually need the industrial zoning as businesses, they can't afford it anymore because of what the data centers have done to the pricing.
So you look at what happened here recently, where the Economic Development Office of Prince William County announced that they had to close down negotiations with a very large pharmaceutical company that was willing to come here and base a research and manufacturing operation, I believe, but certainly a research operation. It would have brought in significant number of high-paying jobs here in Prince William County, people that wouldn't have to travel downtown. Right. And the reason why that pharmaceutical company pulled out was land prices, because you cannot, in Prince William County today, have a competitive land pricing battle with the data centers. If someone walks in and says, we're going to give you $4 million an acre, who's going to say no to that, right?
Yeah.
And so you have a small sector of land that is overrun by the data centers. All those residents bail because they're getting a lottery jackpot from the data centers, and the data centers plop down. And what about the other communities around them? And that's what happened to Page and Lane. Few of those people that live on Page and Lane have told me that if they had to make the decision today, they would say no. We're left in this battle, and it truly is a battle, with fellow residents that we didn't want. It was the data centers that put us there. And we've won so far. We're very confident that the arguments will prevail.
So a significant amount was spent defending this. How do you think that should be understood?
We're left with the fact that up until the decision to withdraw, there's $1.7 million that's been expended, plus what the county itself has expended in resources. So it's well over $2 million in a draw on the county funds, taxpayer funds. We need data centers, right?
Yeah.
The placement of them is the key question. So are there places where they can be placed without having the effects that we see from the sound waves, from 24/7, from the pollution, from the light pollution, all of the factors that played into what we did that would not diminish the property values? And the answer to that is yes, but it's a little more expensive for the data center operators. The planning office really wasn't prepared for this. And I heard them describe that literally the data center people were living in their offices for weeks and weeks in a row to try to give them information, but it was all slanted and against what the citizens. And as we've seen it now play out, we know that they gave them bad information. They have a responsibility under federal law and state law to go out and do an assessment of whether there are historical sites, particularly cemeteries, or the burial sites of people. Now we know, based on lots of records, that there were Confederate and Union soldiers that died in that Page and Lane area, and that they were buried right wherever they died by their comrades. We know that happened. We also know that there was a very significant black community that developed right after the Civil War, where some of those slaves were freed, they got entitlement to land, and these communities built up. We know from journals and from anecdotal reports from relatives that burial sites were located in specific places. The data center operators actually argued that they couldn't find those, and there was no basis to rely upon a journal of a black person or a Bible or some record, because it wasn't on the county records. And do you know why it's not on the county records?
Why?
Blacks were not allowed to, as persons, register any property value in Prince William County at the time it was happening. So for them to cynically come in and say, well, we can't find any records, it shows you how pernicious the way that they operate, because they didn't want to go through go out and find those grave sites. They didn't want to have to do it.
Right.
We've seen the sound studies that have been done, that the health impacts that come from that sound are dramatic for seniors and for children. And it was interesting, during the trial, one of our plaintiffs, who's a resident of Oak Valley, has an adult autistic child. And one of the few pleasures that he has in life is to be able to go out and swim in their backyard pool when the weather allows it. But the sound waves that have been documented that will come from 24/7, she'll have to move. And she testified to that fact. And that's one of the standards the court requires, is that you have to have what's called particularized harm. There has to be a harm that impacts you that's not generally going to impact the rest of the community. And you look today at the corner of Cat Harpin Road and John Marshall Highway, and this is a tragic outcome. You have 5 data centers, and then there are another 5, I think, across the street they're coming in. right up against a community of condos and townhouses.
Yeah.
But here's the worst part. They are within the perimeter of the sound impacts of a special needs children's school.
Oh,
And
geez.
that school's going to have to it's got to move.
Yeah.
And they certainly with these new the ones they're building right now, when they come online, clear the decks. And then you have right next to it another elementary school. And children are impacted by these sound waves that come 24/7. Nobody's thinking, no one thought about it. The developers, the data center people said, no problem. They know, they absolutely know. This would be one of those experiences where if we were able to look behind everything, get the internal emails, I'm sure somebody said, well, there's a noise problem here, and they're just going to impact the community, the residential communities and schools near it. And so if we've learned anything, it is don't trust the data center operators, don't trust anything they say. Let's make them prove it with peer-reviewed published studies that are independent. Let's make sure we validate this. Let's protect our communities and our children and not allow them to just run roughshod over us. I mean, they're the most predatory, corporate, greedy operators I've ever seen in my experience. And they just came in and took an inexperienced planning staff, an uninformed planning staff, not their fault. They didn't deal with something like this, and they ran roughshod over them. And they did it because they could. When we sued them, we got a settlement offer, which was to try to buy us off. But that was the first outreach that we had. And we, of course, said, no, this is a principle that we're defending and our property values, and you're giving us a couple $1 million doesn't cut it.
When you're at this point, the biggest thing that you've learned.
That people are willing to take a leap of faith with us. Obviously, there aren't many homeowners that get too engaged with HOAs.
Right.
We don't have many people in our meetings unless there's a problem. I've always joked and said that being a HOA president ought to be a court-ordered work release program. I've been amazed at the way that people in our community have reacted in a positive way. They've given hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of uncompensated legal advice in this. And then we had these volunteers from Heritage Hunt that have been fabulous.
Oh, that's
people
awesome.
that are former paralegals. There's a fellow named John Liver who has since passed away that did noise studies for us. He was a former NASA engineer.
Wow. So what lessons do you think other communities can learn from what we've been going through here?
So what started on December 12th of 2023 was characterized as that's just a bunch of NIMBYs out on the west side of Prince William County. And I think today what we've learned is that every citizen in Prince William County is impacted, whether it's because of new developments of data centers, whether it's the grids that are coming in that are going to have to be built. But the great thing about it is the community has learned. And we today have a better chance of protecting our communities than we had 4 years ago. So the proper placement of these data centers has got to be done. May not be what the data center operators like. It may be more expensive for them to operate. And the bottom line is, who pays the tab? We, under Virginia law, have to pay for the increased power demand because we don't have generating facilities, so the price of electricity, supply and demand, goes up. And that impacts us directly. It's unfair, and we're seeing that across the world, where people are waking up and saying, why should I pay for this? Virginia's a little unique because that law is so onerous, but other communities are seeing the same thing because no one's thinking ahead and saying, well, what are the impacts? Now they're seeing it.
Yeah. Well, I'm very thankful for all your hard work and all that you do, and I'm thankful that you came and talked to me. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for this opportunity. This is where the impacts are.
Yeah.
And we're talking locally here. Forget the international stuff. Locally, it's had an impact on all of us.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for this chance to talk about it.
Thank you.